The Legend of Zelda series timeline has been something we've held on to for ages and has helped us further immerse ourselves in the Legend of Zelda World. Playing a game, knowing that there's a rich history behind each of these characters, behind each of these locations, knowing we could search for and discover various references and Easter eggs from previous games has helped the games feel so real. Like Hyrule is a place in some distant universe that exists whether we're playing there or not. But one issue that's cropped up for the Legend of Zelda series as of late is where in the world Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom show up on that timeline. Well, Nintendo may have officially released where in the timeline these two games have appeared. In times past, series creator and local Happy Mask salesman Eiji Aonuma, along with the director of the games, Hidemaru Fujibayashi, let out a few statements in regards to what the timeline is, and reasons why they're keeping quiet about it. In an interview with Game Informer, Fujibayashi stated the following: "We realize that fans have a great time theorizing and enjoy thinking about where things fit on the timeline. That's something that the development team recognizes and it considers, but to an extent. And I say to an extent because if we get too into the weeds or too detailed in that placement, it results in kind of creating restraints for our creativity. The process of creating new ideas becomes restricted because we're so tied up in trying to make this fit into a very specific spot in the timeline. We do consider it, but not to an extent where we feel that our development process feels restricted or constrained." Fujibayashi states that the timeline itself can sometimes be a drag on their creative processes, and in the end, a lot of the fun that players have with the mystery of Breath of the Wild is tied up in entering a world that we know nothing about. But this wasn't the end of the interview. We would later get more information on the previous question, with Fujibayashi giving a reiteration of his response. "Obviously, there's something a little bit clearer in our minds, but of course it could be that we're wrong as well. I kinda want to pose the idea that, like in real-life history, you define by the artifacts and by the data that you currently have. So within what we have, there might be a correct answer, but it could be a different answer. So I guess my answer would be that it could be both. Both could be correct." With this answer, Fujibayashi states that the game does have an answer to where it is in the timeline, but it's still under wraps. He insinuates that they know what the timeline is to a degree, and that the answer is like in real life, where you must search for the truth via archaeological finds and try to piece together what happened yourself. In another interview with Famitsu, Fujibayashi was asked about this further. The interviewer asks about how the game fits into the existing Zelda timeline, given Skyward Sword seemingly depicted the founding of Hyrule, while this game also does. Fujibayashi only reaffirms that the game is set following Breath of the Wild and that the Zelda series is designed to have a story and world that doesn't fall apart. With the latter assumption in mind, he believes that there is room for fans to wonder if there are various other possibilities. He suggests one possibility and clarifies that he's only speaking on it as a possibility, that there may have been a history of destruction before TOTK's story of Hyrule's foundation. He says that he does not create things randomly, and wants fans to imagine the parts of the story that have not been told. In the interview, which so far to my knowledge has not received an official English translation, Fujibayashi insinuates that nothing he's done in the games breaks the lore of the previous games or timelines. He's specifically asked about how the foundation of Hyrule, displayed in Tears of the Kingdom, which shows the first ruler of Hyrule, the Zonai king named Rauru, and his queen Sonia, the distant ancestors of Zelda. He insinuates that there could have been a period of destruction before the events of Tears of the Kingdom, insinuating that Rauru might not be the actual first king of Hyrule, but the first king of a revived Hyrule that may or may not also be the one we see in Skyward Sword, which is still uncontested as the first canonical game in the Legend of Zelda timeline. But what this tells us is that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are specifically designed to make us guess about its timeline, with hints being sprinkled around here and there, influences from every timeline. The ambiguity of the game is itself a cornerstone of its mystery, in that just as Link wakes up 100 years after the events of the Calamity without his memories, we're also thrown into a world vaguely familiar, but different enough that we can't recognize when and where we are. The mystery itself can serve as sort of a faux amnesia for the players, helping us further fill the shoes of the hero of legend, in that we might not remember where we are and may have forgotten our past, but we have not forgotten the things that make us the hero we always were. But let's step back for a moment and think about it. While we may be filling the role of Link, we can't forget that by the end of the game, canonically, Link regains all of his memories. So what about us? If we're to fulfill the role of Link, does that mean that we too will regain our past and come to realize where within the timeline this game falls? I think it's a possibility, but only through moving forward in time past Breath of the Wild and into the Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom was the long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild. It was announced in 2019 and was finally released 4 years later in 2023. I remember the day I got my hands on that glorious game. The very opening of the game under Hyrule Castle had me sitting on the edge of my seat, waiting for Ganondorf, who I had been waiting for ages to see come to life since the first trailer. When they mentioned the Zonai, my eyes lit up as I remembered every theory I'd watched on YouTube, every theory I had read on Quora and Reddit. We were so back. But as much as I loved the game and the characters, it left a lot of questions unanswered. Or so I thought. Only after having time to chew the cud have answers started to reveal themselves. This all started with the updated timeline from the recent Nintendo Live, as well as the timeline shown on Nintendo.com. Upon seeing this, my mind once again traveled back to the ancient land of Hyrule to again revisit the history of my favorite medieval knight. Armed with interviews from Aonuma and Fujibayashi tipping my arrows, I was ready to take on the dark beast of the timeline again. And now I think I might have finally slain the demon dragon and rescued the princess. Just as Fujibayashi stated above, all we can really do is theorize on it, since it seems that Nintendo isn't planning to give us any new information at all on the placement. That being said, Fujibayashi did promise that the answers to our questions would be found within the games. So we just gotta know how to put it all together, and I think Tears of the Kingdom is our answer. So let's begin. The foundation of Hyrule. The foundation of Hyrule is highly contested as to actually be the true foundation of Hyrule, especially given the fact that we have Skyward Sword, with even Fujibayashi stating that there's a possibility that there was another Age of Destruction before Tears of the Kingdom. And that's true, but here's the secret about that. Hyrule existed before Skyloft. We're shown in the game itself that Skyloft only came to be when Hyrule itself was brought under assault by the Demon King, who rose up from the depths and caused Hylia herself to raise up the people into the sky on a group of islands where only their loft wings could reach. I have many theories running through my head at this moment. Theories that insinuate that the Demon King demise might have been Tears of the Kingdom's Ganondorf the whole time, as we know that Ganondorf in his Demon King form actually hid away within the depths below the castle. But to fully understand the timeline placement, we need to realize that there is something that sets this game apart from the rest, and that is time travel. While it is true that many of the Legend of Zelda games utilize this function, we're only ever shown 3 timelines. Do you see where I'm going with this? Skyward Sword itself had 2 timelines, but only one is ever followed. Ocarina of Time showed us the kind of continuum we're dealing with, in that timelines shift and create new worlds as opposed to simply causing paradoxes. One theory I've entertained in the past was that Sonia was not supposed to die. If you recall, her death was only due to Zelda's influence. It's possible that it was supposed to be Rauru who was supposed to die, and if so, that means Sonia could very well have been the incarnation of Hylia in her world, and was responsible for Skyloft's creation, in that she formed the Sky Islands like we see in Tears of the Kingdom, moved her people there, and we begin to see the formation of Skyloft on these islands. But this is only one interpretation. Another interpretation that takes into account Fujibayashi's statement that there could have been a previous era of destruction before Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule is to believe that Hyrule was reformed after Skyward Sword. Now, you may be asking, why even set Tears of the Kingdom so close to Skyward Sword? My answer to this has to do with Fujibayashi's statement. He suggests one possibility, clarifying that he's only speaking of it as a possibility, that there may have been this history of destruction. He only suggests that a previous era of destruction is a possibility. He hints that it's possible that this isn't the first Hyrule we've seen, but he refuses to confirm that, lending credence to the idea that this could very well be the first ever Hyrule, or at least one close to it, meaning that we may be looking at Hyrule founded either pre-Skyward Sword or post-Skyward Sword. And given that we haven't seen any Zonai after the era of Skyward Sword, it's possible that this is the very Hyrule that existed before Skyloft. We can't be exactly certain on this, but we know that the continuity of Zelda holds up, as the director himself has stated. So moving on to the concept that this happens after Skyward Sword, not much changes. Time travel is still something integral to the game. The symbology of the game also reveals a lot more to us than we would have originally thought. The symbol of Tears of the Kingdom is an Ouroboros, which is a snake biting its own tail. This is symbolic of a cycle or a loop. It's no secret that the snake itself could very well be symbolized by Zelda herself and her fate in becoming a dragon, but the loop would also have to do with time, as Zelda's whole shtick in this game is time travel and her inability to control it. Unlike the previous game, Zelda never learns to control her powers, and because of this, she elects to swallow her secret stone and undergo draconification. But as with time travel in the Zelda series, we get a butterfly effect, a split timeline. We know that Zelda going back in time to the foundation of Hyrule is not what it was originally supposed to be. This should create a new timeline, but it doesn't seem to, because unlike the way timelines should work through continued existence, Zelda simply rides time forward for tens of thousands of years until she re-emerges in Tears of the Kingdom. That's not how it's supposed to work. You see, when a new timeline is created, this is an entirely new world, with a different history and a different future. If Zelda were to meet a Link in this new timeline, it wouldn't be the one she knew, yet she meets us. So what does that mean? Am I saying that the Zelda we meet as a dragon isn't the same Zelda from the beginning of the game? No. Am I saying that the Link we play as in Tears of the Kingdom is not the same one from Breath of the Wild? No. What I am saying is that somehow we've got a grandfather paradox in a world of timelines, hence the snake eating its own tail. What are the implications? Well, we know that this doesn't invalidate the older games or their timeline according to Fujibayashi, so it should create a new timeline. The only explanation is that somehow Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom take place in this new timeline Zelda created, which would explain why Nintendo continually separates Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom from any timeline. It's an unknown timeline that created itself. Seems far-fetched, but when you realize that Zelda herself is the incarnation of the goddess of time, meaning that she can do whatever she wants with the timeline, especially after becoming a dragon, it begins to make more sense. Now think of this. If this truly is the original Hyrule being founded circa Skyward Sword, this means that Ganondorf's birth in this game makes him the first canonical Ganondorf, either being Demise or the earliest reincarnation of him. In this game, due to Zelda's actions, Ganondorf is not killed, which means he cannot reincarnate. His malice keeps forming as the Calamity in an effort to wake his true body up. It's his desire to reincarnate into the body that Rauru sealed away. That means that since Ganondorf is still alive, but only sealed, he cannot truly reincarnate. This means that if Tears of the Kingdom's foundation of Hyrule takes place before Ocarina of Time, while Breath of the Wild and Link's experience of Tears of the Kingdom takes place after it, then there could have been no new Ganondorfs born, which means Ocarina of Time could not technically take place. Essentially, if you follow what I'm saying at all, I'm attempting to explain that if Rauru's foundation is the first Hyrule, or the subsequent Hyrule after Skyward Sword, which Fujibayashi doesn't deny, this would mean that Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild take place in a totally new and unnamed timeline, which explains why the official updated timelines shown at Nintendo Live and on the Nintendo website are officially hinting at this new timeline's creation. One may be tempted to point out that Fujibayashi and Aonuma were asked if the game takes place before or after Ocarina of Time, and they mentioned that it does. To you, that might sound like they confirm Ocarina of Time's history within Breath of the Wild, but I don't see it that way. I see it as an era. This simply means that the point in time where Ocarina of Time would have taken place has passed, but that doesn't mean that the events of Ocarina of Time happened in this world. Remember, there can only be one incarnation of Ganondorf at a time. He cannot be alive in two places at once, which is the reason why Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Wind Waker's Ganondorfs were all the same. So all this really boils down to is if you believe that Rauru's kingdom was the first. To me, that doesn't even matter as much. The very fact that Zelda went to a time where she wasn't supposed to be, messed with things, and became the Light Dragon, all of that to me is proof that there should have been a timeline split, and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom exist within it. While they may have mentioned the child timelines events in Breath of the Wild, don't forget that a lot of things from a lot of timelines were mentioned in that game, and shouldn't be enough to substantiate anything. If you ask me, I say that Tears of the Kingdom and its predecessor are in completely different timelines, unlisted in the official timeline placement, just as Nintendo shows on the updated timeline. But what do you think? Do you agree with this overly excited rambling about timelines and director statements? Does my theory hold water? Or do you think something else has happened? What do you make of all this new information? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when more videos like this drop. And until next time, peace out.